Hello, all, and welcome to our webinar today on Equitable Micromobility. Our speakers today will highlight current programs and efforts by cities and operators to bring equitable access to all communities with micromobility. My name is Simbiat Yusuf. I am the Member Relations Manager at Fourth. Today, I'll be joining you all as the moderator. And before we start, we have some news and updates from the Fourth team. Attendees, we ask that you please be sure to submit all your questions through the attendee chat. We'll be getting through to them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. After the webinar today, we'll also be sharing out the webinar presentations as well as the recording and additional resources. So if you are missing anything, don't worry, you'll be able to catch up with the webinar recap. And as we like to start with a little bit of information about Fourth, who we are and what we do. Fourth is a nonprofit trade association advocating for smart transportation through our work in four main focus areas, which are industry development, which means the roadmap is coming up soon. More information on that in a little bit. We have our consumer engagement efforts, our policy advocacy, as well as innovations. If you have any questions about Fourth, please feel free to reach us at fourthmobility.org for more information about Fourth. And as we say, through the support of our members and sponsors for our events and Fourth, we are able to bring programs like this to you. So we want to take this moment to thank you for our members and for our sponsors for helping bring these engaging topics, engaging webinars, and engaging events and supporting our mission at Fourth. If you would like more information about the Fourth membership program or sponsorship opportunities for webinars or any of our events, please feel free to reach out to myself. My email is on the screen right now, or you can reach me at simbiaty@fourthmobility.org. Y as in yam. Thank you. Okay, roadmap, as I mentioned, the roadmap conference, we are just over 5 weeks away from the roadmap conference. The virtual conference will start Monday, June 14th through Wednesday, June 16th for 3 half days of engaging panels and networking opportunities. The curated roadmap program will center conversations on charging, impact, cutting edge, and vehicles. Panels will include scaling electric bus adoption, planning for plugs, putting equitable transportation electrification into practice workshop, which I'm very excited about. And we also have a ton of lightning rounds covering topics from EV marketing, how do we market electric vehicles, to international strategy development. I am so excited for the panel. As you can see, can't wait to see you all. If you haven't already, please make sure you've reserved your spot by registering now. Registration is still open. If you have any questions or you're like thinking, I want to sponsor this conference because it's amazing, please feel free to reach out via our website, roadmapfort.org, or you can reach out to our international marketing manager, Ashley Duplanty. Our email and the website is also on the screen. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to us. Tickets, registration, sponsorship, program questions, feel free to reach out. And our speakers today are Quincy Brown, who is the co-founder of Wheelrise LLC. He's a native transportation planner from Portland. His research consistently focused on creating sustainable and equitable planning and programming that support and involve people of color, people with disabilities, and low-income residents. We also have Joe Wachunas, program manager at Fourth, who is passionate about sustainability and proud to live in a net zero home with solar panels to charge his electric vehicle. And in the not so distant past, he was an Italian language teacher Buongiorno. Destinie Hammond is the communications manager at North America Bikeshare Association, NABSA. She previously held roles of community engagement coordinator at Jump by Uber and helped launch New Orleans' first bikeshare system, Blue Bike NOLA. She's excited to coordinate and amplify NAPSA's story, which we'll hear a little bit about in her presentation. And we are truly, truly excited to have our special guest today, Brodie Hylton, who is the CEO at Cascadia Mobility Inc. Brodie has spent over 10 years launching and operating large-scale urban bikeshare projects and bikeshare businesses. And before we start today, we have an intro question for you all. We ask our attendees to participate as well as our speakers. So before I ask the question, Quincy, Destinie, Joe, Brodie, can you please join me on stage by turning on your webcam? Thank you all. So our question today, since we're talking about equitable micromobility and operation of them, our question is, if you were a form of micromobility, what would you be and why? And let me start. I would say a tricycle, an electric tricycle. I was actually looking for that because balance is key. I can't balance on a two-wheeler, but 3 is my sweet spot. So, Joe, do you want to start us off?
Sure thing. In my regular life, I just use a plain old bike. But if I were to be a form of electric micromobility, it would be the electric bike. When I get to borrow one from Fourth or I rent one from our local bike share, I'm just amazed at the speed. It gets me home. My house is about 4 miles away from the office, and it gets me home in 12 to 13 minutes. I zoom past parked cars. I just love that.
Yes, Quincy?
I think I would be an electric scooter. I'm really a big fan of the scooters. Used to have a scooter, one of those Razor scooters when I was a kid. So the electrification of them being able to go that quickly and not have to pedal is something I'm really interested in.
Good. Destinie?
I would be an e-cargo bike because I have a couple of dogs that I like to cart around with me. So I think that would make it a little bit easier instead of just having that traditional bike basket.
Yes, and finally, Brodie.
Yeah, for me, it's definitely the traditional shared bike. There's no more efficient or easy way to get around, and it's the simplest and most efficient form of transportation. So that's my choice for sure.
Thank you all so much. You can all turn off your camera now because we're not done with introduction. And attendees, please be sure to answer the question as well. If you're a form of micromobility, either electric or not, what would you be? And you can answer that in our attendee chat. Before we start, we have 2 poll questions for you all to begin with. So our first poll question is, do you use electric micromobility? And if so, what type? You can just submit your answer by clicking the screen. Okay, so we have about 63% saying no, 23% with 24 now with e-bike, and we have some 19% with e-scooters and other. No one's e-skateboarding. Oh, okay. We might need to change that. Thank you for that. We have another poll question here. Do you use electric micromobility to connect to transit? So we're asking for connectivity. Are you using it to connect to transit? Okay, we have about 14% saying yes and 88% saying no. So we have a lot of work to do with electric micromobility and promoting and intersectionality with that. Thank you all for answering the poll questions. I see some e-moped user, e-bike and everything. So thank you all for participating. And with that, I will pass it along to our first presenter of the day, Quincy. Please turn on your webcam. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. So I'm going to be talking about compensation, privacy, and programming, and looking towards moving towards an equitable social framework in micromobility. So I'm Quincy. I'm the co-founder and principal planner at Wheelrise Consulting. I'm an urban planner by trade, and I focus on the intersection of transportation, mobility, and communities that are underserved by mobility projects. So We All Rise is a urban planning stakeholder engagement firm. We focus on a lot of holistic ways of looking at how to do urban development and rural development as well. And so that looks at DEIA training, which means diversity, equity, and inclusion training, mobility, transportation, equity-driven community outreach, stakeholder alignment and project management, and circular economic development. We partner with a lot of different organizations, including SPIN, Portland Bureau of Transportation, Oregon Department of Transportation, Biketown, and TriMet. So we're going to kind of go over the different programs that our partners do and kind of how we can look at equitable micromobility resources and how can we, better connect transportation resources through municipal cities, kind of like TriMet, to other organizations like SPIN and Portland Bureau of Transportation that maybe provide other resources. So looking at how to take transportation to an equitable approach to really get people to want to use micromobility resources. So TriMet has a low-income fare called the Hopper Pass. It's a really cool program. It's for people that are under a certain amount of the median household income in the area. It allows for transit riders to only pay $28 a month, and it caps the rider to paying that. So you're actually paying per day. So you pay $2.50 per day, and then when you get to $28, it's free. And so it allows you to go, as TriMet says, hop from CTran, which is the Vancouver Metropolitan Transportation Service, and then TriMet, which is the Tri-County Metropolitan Service in Portland, and then our Portland streetcar. So it allows you to, very easily load money onto your Hopper Pass. You're able to do that at mini marts and other spaces in Portland, and it really does help people access that first step to micromobility services. So Spin and Biketown, they do a really cool program. Spin has their Spin Access program, which is very similar to TriMet, which provides discounted fares to folks who are similarly qualify at a low income status. And they also provide access to folks that have smartphones for mobile location services and credit cards. So people that maybe do not have a smartphone that still want to be able to use Spin, they do support folks being able to access Spin like that. And so that really helps people, when you're getting off that TriMet resource, being able to hop on to the Spin micromobility resource and get into your neighborhood. And then Portland Bureau of Transportation has a program called Biketown, which is Portland's municipal Bikeshare program. And they're currently working on a program called Prescribe a Bike. What this is going to be doing is it's going to be giving people a bike through their healthcare provider. So the healthcare provider will articulate that a bike would be beneficial to a user's health. And so that program, they'll get a free electric bike and they'll be able to ride it throughout that time. The duration of the program is 2 years. And throughout that program, they'll be able to learn how to use the system. They'll get helmets and safety gears, educations about riding the system, and then access to group rides and prepaid cards located within $20 to kind of allow for that sign-up barrier. So really trying to get people to use the electric mobility devices to get around the city away from those, already existing municipal transportation public spaces. And so PBOT also does a lot of other programs to not only program the space, but also look at how to get people to be more involved in actually the active transportation community. And so the Healthy Businesses program is a program that allows for residents and retail spaces and restaurants to open up on the streets. And we've been creating these plaza places that are acting as kind of mobility hubs to also provide, ways to kind of lounge and take a rest, after being, after biking around. And so the Healthy Business program is really starting to program the street so people feel wanting to more, use these micromobility resources. So organizations like Spin are placing their e-mobility devices near these healthy business locations to get people to ride them more. The transportation wallet kind of links all of these different resources together. It's a digital wallet that allows for digital wallet and also a card wallet that allows for people to load the money on to this service that allows them to spend money on either the TriMet system, One Streetcar, Biketown, or e-scooter pilot programs. And so it really gets people to feel more comfortable using the multitude of services that Portland has particularly, and really gets to that kind of equitable transition into the first and last mile solutions. And then lastly, we have the Oregon Department of Transportation. They work in really trying on that mode shifts and behavioral change. And so they create these programs. One of them is called Get There Oregon, that really gets commuters and employees to practice safe and equitable and sustainable traveling methods. And so what they're able to do is they kind of compete to get different employers to use sustainable methods so that they can actually understand how people are moving through a space when it comes to a work environment, but also kind of gamify the process. So there's awards that you can win and prizes that you can win if you're able to reduce your carbon emissions by taking more active forms to work. And so, kind of in the programming side, We All Rise really realizes to really lead an equitable approach to micromobility, there needs to be the programs that exist in those spaces. So we have currently our Multicultural Reentry program, which looks at how to program streets to encourage and influence non-traditional folks who maybe feel uncomfortable using these transportation resources. And so our Multicultural Reentry program includes marketplaces, vendor pop-ups, and resources for SPIN and other organizations to market their program and also lead safety activities and get people to sign up for their access programs. A couple of programs that we've done are our multicultural events. So we had a pop-up artist space called the Kinetic Collective. It had rotating vendors, large multicultural events, including our Rise and Power Fest, and was also considered a mobility hub. So you can see there's a spin booth, a TriMet booth, and other mobility resources for community members. And lastly, we've also done a very similar festival in Eugene in a virtual platform, partnering with the Wow Hall, the City of Eugene, and University of Oregon to also support kind of in that just transition of micromobility resources and getting non-traditional community members on active transportation resources and getting them the information that they need to be successful on the resources. So if there's any questions, I'll let anyone else go. Feel free to add those into the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Quincy, for that. And the importance of bringing in integrity during the planning is definitely important. So when we're thinking about these micromobility options and the micromobility programs, integrity is something that I noted from your presentation that's quite important. So thank you for sharing. And as Quincy mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the attendee chat and we'll get to them during the Q&A, which will be shortly soon. So we'll pass it along to our next speaker, which is Destinie Hammond from NABSA.
Hello, all from New Orleans. As mentioned, my name is Destinie Hammond, and I'm the Communications Manager for NABSA. Prior to that, I served as the Marketing and Community Engagement Manager for Blue Bikes NOLA, a former Jump by Uber Bikeshare system. And it was in this latter role where I was exposed to the importance of workforce diversity in shared micromobility as a tool for building stronger, more successful systems that are representative of their communities. So a bit about NABSA. The North American Bikeshare Association is a 501c3 organization founded in 2014. NABSA is a membership organization that provides resources and education to its members and serves as a convener in the shared micromobility industry. And despite its name, NABSA is not limited to only bikeshare systems. We represent bikeshare and e-scooter systems, operators, host cities, equipment manufacturers, and technology providers. If it fits in a bike lane, it fits in NABSA. NABSA has 6 core values, one of which is diversity and equity. Our goal is to promote an inclusive culture that encourages, supports, and celebrates the diverse voices of our staff, our members, and their communities. And at our 2018 conference, we looked around the room and realized that we still had a way to go towards reaching that goal. And it was this realization that led us to collaborate with the Better Bikeshare partnership to create the Workforce Diversity Toolkit for the shared micromobility industry. Diversity is a numbers game. Inclusion is about impact. Companies can mandate diversity, but they have to cultivate inclusion. This quote from Janet Stovall, an inclusion advocate that specializes in corporate solutions, means that true inclusion in the workplace is worked on continuously, and it doesn't stop with just adding a section to your employee handbook or bylaws. The Workforce Diversity Toolkit provides guidance towards making intentional, long-lasting changes. The following information that I'm going to dive into is a small portion of what you can find in that toolkit. So why prioritize workplace diversity? Ethnically diverse companies perform 33% better than the norm, and Forbes' best workplaces for diversity enjoy 24% higher revenue growth. Teams made up of people from diverse backgrounds, different nationalities, gender identities, ages, and et cetera are more innovative, meaning that almost half of their revenue comes from products and services launched within the last 3 years. And in order to reap the benefits I just listed, all levels of teams should be diverse, including leadership, decision makers, and those making financial decisions. Building diverse teams starts with establishing intentional hiring practices that consider how job descriptions, educational requirements, outreach, and interviews have an impact on who is selected to fill a position. With this in mind, Biketown and the Portland Bureau of Transportation developed clear diversity goals and how to achieve them, and outline those tactics in a contract with Motivate. So the Coalition of Communities of Color advised PBOT on the development of their high road standards. At a high level, it addresses their three-pronged approach to equity: training and hiring staff from underserved communities, affordable pricing and accessibility, and expanding their system coverage area. Their high road standards resulted in 3 goals. 50% or more of total employment hours come from underrepresented or economically disadvantaged people. At least 30% of job hours must be represented by people of color, low-income residents, veterans, disabled individuals, immigrants, and refugees, and formerly incarcerated people. And Motivate must exclusively use training programs and job service programs in order to recruit those underserved and underrepresented people. So here are a couple of questions that we think you should be asking yourself as you're starting to think about your own hiring practices. Is your staff representative of the diversity of the people that you're serving? Meaning, do your staff look like the community that you're serving? And are women and people of color represented at all levels of the team, from seasonal employees to management? Well-designed hiring protocols are a great start, but employee development and retention strategies are also necessary to help maintaining a diverse staff. In 2016, the Bicycle Transit Systems team addressed this by proactively creating a company-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion committee called BOOST, or Bridge, Observe, Organize, Strengthen, and Teach. The committee's goals are to broaden the networks used to find candidates, implement programming to increase cultural awareness and understanding, advise senior leadership on company policies and procedures with regards to diversity and inclusion, and collect data for diversity and inclusion efforts. And based on their experience with this committee, BTS recommended the following: be vocal and intentional about hiring a diverse workforce. There are times when you may have to proactively go out and find those individuals. Wait until you get a diverse set of resumes before you begin your review process to make sure that you have a full cross-section of people. Talk about the priority for a diverse and inclusive culture within your workplace. Acknowledge where your organization is currently falling short. Prioritize diversity and inclusion, education, and training, especially of the leadership team. And keep diversity goals on everyone's mind at all levels. Leading the industry towards a more diverse workforce is an essential priority for NABSA, and the toolkit served as a helpful launching point for setting those more intentional discussions around how the industry can cultivate diversity and inclusion on its teams. Moving forward, it's important that we all hold each other accountable. And so in an effort to help that happen, the 2020 State of the Industry report for North America will include a metric that will set the baseline for the number of shared micromobility systems in North America that have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs or guidelines. And finally, taking time to host or attend webinars like this one or participate in workshops keeps DEI top of mind for the industry and pushes us all towards meeting our goals. And those interested in learning more about the diversity toolkit and the self-evaluation checklist that comes with it will be able to find that information in the recap email after this webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Destinie. And a note from your presentation, in order to be impactful in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is important to be proactive. You can't be reactive in this. So thank you so much for sharing that. Truly appreciate it. And as Destinie mentioned, the diversity toolkit will be added in the webinar recap that will be going out today. And in an effort to save time and get those Q&A coming, I will then pass it along to our next speaker, Joe Wachunas from Fort.
Hey everybody, great to be with you here today. So great to hear about Wheelrise's work with Quincy. And then Destinie, I just love the idea of cultivating inclusion. That's such a powerful sentiment. It's great to be talking with you all. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Fort's work in micromobility and increasing the accessibility of it. Kind of what we've learned over the years and what we're looking to in the future, working with such great partners as the folks featured on the webinar today. I'll start off by saying that micromobility is some of our hardest work to get funded, which is an interesting point. Forth works across the transportation spectrum, from electric bikes to electric school buses and everything in between. And micromobility doesn't seem to have a lot of funding streams. Maybe that's because there aren't the major manufacturers and interests that help provide resources for other types of work. But we see micromobility as so important, just a little bit lacking in revenue to create good programs to increase accessibility, and we're hoping to change that. That being said, Forth, in our 10-year history, Forth has worked in micromobility throughout the 10 years, and I want to highlight a couple of the programs we have and then what we're thinking about in the future. I'll start with our community electric bike project. This happened in 2017. It was a 9-month project that grew out of another project that we had done. In 2016, we did an electric car share project with our great allies in Hacienda Community Development Corporation. And we found in that electric car share project that a lot of folks either didn't drive or didn't have access to licenses. And so we wanted to launch an electric bike share project to increase accessibility to electric transportation of folks who couldn't drive. And so Forth created this program where we had around 30 folks try out electric bikes for 10 weeks. And over this period of time, about 4,000 miles were ridden, which was 4 times the amount of miles that were driven in the electric car share project. So I thought that was interesting. And we learned some fascinating things. One, that people traveled further in electric bikes than they would in typical bikes. And 2, that electric bikes really filled a mobility gap for folks who were lacking in access to mass transportation. So we saw just how important that electric bikes and electric micromobility was to increasing access to clean transportation. I'll have my colleague Crystal put a link into the chat of the report that we made after that. It's actually a really fascinating read on some of our learning lessons and all that we learned about that program. So, flash forward 2 years from 2017, and suddenly we have this new form of electric transportation, electric micromobility, the electric scooter that's on the scene. In Portland and many cities across the United States, in 2018 was the big year for scooter launching. And suddenly we all saw there's this new form of electric micromobility that appeals to people that typically don't use micromobility or electric micromobility. And that, in the city of Portland, there was an initial 4-month pilot project, and the city of Portland did a great study. And they found that a lot of folks who were riding electric scooters, A, didn't know how to ride them very well, and B, were confused about rules of the road because they weren't used to being users of micromobility. And so we were kind of inspired by this gap in education, and so we started doing a lot of safety education around scooters. We partnered with a lot of the great scooter operators who are members in Fourth, and in 2019 we did 10 scooter workshops. We educated about 300 people, gave away at least that many helmets, and we did these at community events like Sunday Parkways, where they close off streets, and then partnering with our friends at Hacienda during a food bank pickup to do a workshop as well. And we just saw the value in on-the-ground education around electric micromobility, especially these new forms as well. So that led to our Safe and Equitable Scooters and E-Bikes project, which is currently underway. It's a Metro-funded project, again, to carry forth this education around new forms of electric micromobility that are coming on the market and that people want to be educated on. So, of course, we're in a time of COVID, so it was hard doing events last year, and we created 2 videos that are highlighting our new form that Quincy was talking about of a shared electric or shared e-bike transportation called Biketown. I'll have my colleague Crystal put a link to the video in the chat. These both highlight the accessibility of this program and also some of the safety features and how to do electric bikes. We're having out as well. In addition to the videos, we've been creating open source e-bike and e-scooter training curricula for other nonprofits and governments to use to help conduct these safe scooter and e-bike courses in the future. So we're really excited to launch that in a couple weeks, these curricula. And then we're going to be pivoting this summer to actually getting back to COVID-safe live safety courses with our partners, the Street Trust, and we're going to be going out to affordable housing communities in partnership with the Portland Bureau of Transportation and educating folks on both shared e-bikes, personal e-bikes, and shared scooters. So really excited for that to come on. I also just want to highlight one way we're working. We've helped create with a lot of other folks a really fantastic e-bikes for all working group. We found that, again, the e-bike industry doesn't have a lot of representation. Yet, we're all working in silos a little bit. So we've joined together and we do a monthly meeting with folks from nonprofits, local governments, and the industry, all of us talking about how we can together promote electric bikes. We're now about 40 people, mostly in Oregon, but that now expanding to other parts of the United States. I'll have my colleague Crystal put our website in the chat room if you'd like to get more information. Basically, we start each meeting learning from communities that are promoting electric bikes in different ways. For example, the gentleman in the middle on the bottom row of our screen was from Sweden, and he was talking to us about Sweden's electric bike rebate that they had a couple years ago and what we can learn from that. And we want to promote e-bikes in all sorts of ways. One way that really has come out is through rebates. And maybe not through e-bike rebates for the general public, because e-bike sales are through the roof and we might not need them, but low-income rebates for folks who were an e-bike price tag, which is $2,000 or $4,000, which is just too much and is a barrier to accessing that transportation. So we're working hard with our partners to promote e-bike rebates and to create programs around e-bike rebates. And going forward, there's a couple things on our horizon. One, like I said, is this idea of e-bike rebates. Two, some of our partners in the working group are actually giving away e-bikes to frontline workers to try them out and to have them share their stories on electric bikes. Like Quincy talked about the Biketown for All program, this shared electric bike system with really inexpensive access to these shared bikes is something we have our eyes on. These educating on scooter access programs, where folks can sign up for scooter use and pay a really small fee to use them. And as Quincy highlighted as well, the transportation wallet program. All these ways seem like key ways to make micromobility more accessible. And with that being said, I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Brodie Hylton, who is running a nonprofit that we're incubating here in Fourth around Bikeshare in small cities in Eugene. So, Brodie, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Brodie Hylton. I'm the CEO of Cascadia Mobility. As Joe mentioned, we're a brand new nonprofit under fiscal sponsorship and incubation within Fourth. We are specifically focused on shared mobility programming in small to mid-sized cities in the Pacific Northwest. And as Quincy and Joe so depthly communicated about the importance around communicating outward and how to bring all communities on board with a micromobility and e-bike, e-scooter, any type of electric mobility programming you're doing in your city. And as Destinie has so clearly outlined, the importance of your workforce really reflecting the communities you serve as a critical piece of that equitable programming. We need credible partners in the community, the workforce being the front lines of that communication strategy in the field. So those are all critical pieces. Mostly what we've talked about here are really larger city urban programming. Cascadia Mobility has formed as a result of small Northwest cities losing access to their shared bike share programs over the past 12 months due to COVID and other factors, industry consolidation. And so our nonprofit is specifically focused on partnering with small to mid-sized cities to operate equitable shared transportation programs at scale. And so right now, we feel that there's a pretty significant opportunity. Small to mid-sized cities want shared transportation. They see this as a public service. We see this as an extension of transit. And bigger cities have a sort of a lower bar to clear when it comes to making these types of programs successful, because there's potentially, for operators, a much simpler path to profitability. And really, in this industry right now, as we look at the Spins and the Birds and the Limes and the others, shared transportation is viewed as a potential profit opportunity. But interestingly, the question is, do we view this, shared transportation and shared electric transportation, as a business opportunity or as a public service? And I think there are multiple ways to look at this, but when we sort of think about the broader goal of reducing dependence on automobiles, making more efficient use of land, providing access for more and more people to get to where they need to go cost effectively, that cities understand that shared transportation really is a public service. And in order for something to truly serve the public, it requires municipal investment. So that's really what we are trying to articulate, and the partnerships that we're trying to build in these small to mid-sized cities, helping them understand that, for-profit providers aren't going to be necessarily clamoring to come to a Eugene, Oregon, perhaps, or another small Northwest community. So we have we're the operators now of Peace Health Rides, which is a bike share project in Eugene, and we have ambitions to expand the system. We have ambitions to provide much greater equity programming. And in order to do things that don't generate a profit, we need partnership, whether that comes from our sponsor, Peace Health, whether that comes from the city. And so as we think about, what we want to be as a nonprofit and what we want Peace Health Rides to be, we find that the opportunity is there. We need to identify the resources and the partners, but over time we're seeing we are seeing the industry and the public sentiment trending towards how valuable shared transportation can be for a community. And so we're working with the city of Eugene to expand that type of programming. And when we look at how we can serve other small to mid-sized cities, specifically in the Northwest, we think that the investment is there. We think that the opportunity is there, and we think that the demand and the need is there to make shared transportation a success together. Taking a step back in my career, having launched many large bike share projects, I just want to sort of reinforce the points that Destinie and Quincy were making. In order for shared transportation to be successful from an equitability standpoint, it requires public investment, because not every neighborhood is going to be profitable. It also requires partnership with the private vendor to be able to provide the services and to be able to partner with credible organizations that can communicate the value proposition of the mode, if you will. So we've got to have the right price. It's got to be in the right place for people to use it. And it has to have the right type of promotion, which is exactly sort of some of the material that Joe was covering around ridership, safe ridership classes and trainings, so that people understand how to use the product safely, so that they understand how to access and lock and end a trip, all these little details. It's important that nonprofits are engaged in the communities that these modes are trying to reach, so that there are credible ambassadors and organizations out in the field helping to educate the population. And frankly, working as Destinie said, whether it's employees or whether it's ambassador community members, people that are trusted reflections of the community are critical to bringing everybody on board with the goals we're all trying to accomplish. So that's pretty much what I would say about who Cascadia Mobility is and my view on equitable access to shared transportation. I'll kick it back to Simbi and we'll maybe do the Q&A. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. Those were fantastic presentations. We did have a question. We will be sharing the webinar slides, so all of the presentation decks, as well as this recording after the webinar. So right now, I will invite again all of our speakers to turn on your webcam, come back on stage as we start the Q&A portion of our webinar. And I am going to stop the slide share presentation so everyone can see our faces very clearly. We have a lot of questions coming in, and I will try my best to ask them all. And if we don't, we will have the emails of our speakers on the recap email, so you can continue the conversation there. We'll be sharing the Q&A with our speakers as well. The first question I want to ask is, we've talked about different programs or toolkits. Is there a one-size-fit-all? Can we say, okay, there's a one-size-fit-all equity plan that we can use, and then all communities, all cities can just use this equity toolkit, and then that is the solution to our problem? Destinie, I'll have you go first because NAFSA has the diversity toolkit, and then Quincy, Joe, and Brodie.
Yes, so based on my experience, I don't think there is this one-size-fit-all solution, because when you're looking at how to best bring in equity and diversity into whether it's your workplace or you're focused more on your operations side, you need to custom tailor your tactics and approach to your own individual communities. And additionally, you need to focus those efforts based on your own team members. We can provide each other guidelines, tips, just based on our own experiences, but ultimately it comes down to your unique rhythm in your own community.
Thank you. Quincy?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think it's really hard to understand how communities are going to be dealing with. Some of the work that we do is really stakeholder mapping. So trying to understand in unique communities in different site spaces, what is the community that has traditionally not been uplifted, and sometimes that's not the same. We work on projects in Oregon City, and that's a very different community than North and Northeast Portland, or comparing, for example, Oakland to like San Francisco County. And so it's really hard to actually like look at those things like that. But I think some tools that I use as an equity practitioner is, Title VI, Title IX, ADA compliancy, historical preservation laws, and National Environmental Policy Act and California Environmental Policy Act. Those are, when you look at those kind of laws, and you try to create like a nexus of how to like uplift individuals that may be dealing with challenges in those spaces, that can be really helpful to like make sure that you're helping all communities equitably. But when it comes to like applying those concepts into actual communities, that really depends on the people that you're working with.
Joe, anything to add on this, Brodie?
Yeah, I'd say, there might not be a one size fits all, but I think we have all so much to learn from each other. One thing that came to mind for me was in our e-bike working group when we had Sven from Sweden come up and talk to us about how they had instilled e-bike rebates in Sweden and the backlash that resulted from that. Now, that might not totally happen if we get an e-bike rebate program in Oregon or around the United States, but it's good to be prepared for that. So if we can learn from the early pioneers on increasing accessibility, I think we'll be in a better position.
Brodie?
I think a toolkit like NABSA offers is a great way to provide a framework. And then, really, as Quincy and others have said, is using that then to customize the needs of the specific community you're working in.
Thank you. Another question came with regards to policy. How can people or how can cities with low that are not set up for active or sustainable travel like micromobility, how can those cities influence policy and those policies will then increase interest in sustainable micromobility? This one, I will have Brodie, you go first, and we'll switch it around.
Sure. So just to be clear, what can cities do to increase access to micromobility? Was that the sort of the gist of the question?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a chicken and egg question is, do you provide the safe riding infrastructure first, or do you provide the devices first, which then fundamentally necessitates and obligates a municipality to create that safe riding or cycling infrastructure? And I've seen it go both ways. And, obviously, more people will feel comfortable using shared modes and electric mobility if they have safe places to ride and they understand how to ride, right? On the other hand, nothing obligates a municipality or necessitates safe cycling infrastructure or riding infrastructure faster than hundreds of devices available to the public. So it's a little bit more of a guerrilla ad hoc sort of way to approach it. But I've seen cities do that successfully because, what cities don't want to do is introduce a mode that people really seem to adopt and enjoy and appreciate and then take it away. So what some city strategies will be to place the devices and then use that momentum to build the infrastructure. But either way, in order for us to sort of reach a broad adoption and accessibility by all, we must have safe and accessible, lanes to use.
Thank you.
Brodie, a follow-up question to you on that. Do you feel like cities sometimes allow micromobility or to exist in the city, but then don't install the infrastructure? Is that a common pitfall?
I'm sure there's an example, Joe, but I can't, I really can't. Certainly they fall short, and I think we see that broadly in North America, to be honest. But I wouldn't say that cities do nothing after they introduce shared transportation.
Anyone has any point on how cities could influence adoption through policies?
Yeah, I mean, I think taking a program approach is really important. We're currently working with Oregon City, and I think they're dealing with very similar challenges and wanting to move towards more active forms of transportation, but realizing that a lot of the people don't understand maybe like the role of active transportation or how it could be used for them. We're really just confused about the process, and so in our project, I think what we did was really try to focus on teaching community members about the impact of active transportation projects, particularly on their health. And then having that be more of a grassroots effort. So now community members understand, like, this is really important and I actually need this in my community. So I'm going to go to these, city council meetings and actually talk about why I want this. And I think from a policy standpoint and what can like firms and, agencies do, I think, our firm particularly, we work really closely with organizations like PBOT and ODOT, like to try to understand how can we link community needs to agency, budgets and projects. And I think like really trying to sit somewhere in between those two programs of like, how can you actually, adequately understand community needs and actually advocate for that at the government space to change policy that actually will benefit communities so that their community feels like they're actually being supported by government.
Thank you. And to that question on increasing ridership, increasing adoption, there was a question on how do we encourage seniors to try or use micromobility. I know there's this, it's a new technology, so it's for the cool kids, the Gen Zs, the millennials. Are we still in the cutting edge of technology as millennials? So how do we encourage seniors who might have limited mobility options? And Joe, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I think we saw at a lot of our safety workshops that if you're out at a public event and you have the option available to try out in a safe, no traffic area, that can be a great entryway for seniors to really get on these new forms of electric micromobility. And I would just also say that these forms of electric micromobility show so much promise for seniors because they allow you to have assistance with your propulsion, and so that's why they're so exciting. But I would say workshops at low stress environments are a great way for people to try them out.
Destiny?
To add to that, I'd also suggest finding local groups in your communities that you can partner with. It can be something like organizing a group ride and bringing out the community members or the members of that organization and having them maybe reach out to their networks and bring in more folks. And that tactic can actually be used for a lot of different groups. But I also agree that having those in-person events where someone can talk to a person face-to-face and actually put their hands on the vehicle and get like a use case for how they can use it in their like day-to-day life really, really makes a great difference in adoption.
Thank you. Quincy, Brodie?
I'll just add one thing, which is to say, and Destiny made a great point there, which is regardless of the community you're trying to reach, whether it's senior citizens or whether it's a particular community of color or a particular type of workforce, say that can use Bikeshare to access their job, the key to, I think, getting people to use the tool is to make it accessible, and the key then is to partner with credible organizations. So to reach seniors, it's perhaps not for the shared mobility company or provider to set up a workshop, but it's the role is to identify places where seniors gather and to provide the training there. I mean, that's the key to success here, I think, is leveraging partnerships within the communities. You don't want bike groups, you don't want micromobility groups, you want to leverage community groups where the people you are trying to reach can be accessed.
Yeah, kind of to touch bases on that as well. I think, when I speak to my parents who are now considered seniors, and I try to understand like what's going to influence them to use active transportation resources in their retirement, I think it's really comes down to having spaces to go to. I think like seniors, I think there's a lot of lack of planning from a programming standpoint of like activities for people that are older in communities. So there's not actually a reason to take an e-bike, 2 miles down the road. And so I think like really trying to figure out how do we plan holistically for people that are aging in communities and creating like low stress facilities. And so really ensuring that like, anyone from 5 to 85 can actually access the facility, and ensuring that there's resources to support children as well as their grandparents as they're wanting to walk to a park.
Yes. So there was a question with regards to equity goals. So are there examples where equity goals, maybe a city or we don't need to name names, but where equity goals fell short? And are there examples where equity goals are being uplifted and doing it? Cities are doing this right, and if so, can you just share some of the examples or some of the key things that were done, or the key things that was missed when the equity goals fell short versus key points, key takeaways when the equity goals were met? I would say, Destinie, do you want to take this first? Then we'll go to Quincy, Brodie, and Joe.
Sure thing. So the diversity toolkit actually includes a few examples of approaches that some cities are taking towards hitting their diversity goals. A couple mentioned in the presentation, Peabot and bicycle transit. And I think that their proactive approach is, the biggest takeaway, is taking that time to kind of sit back and acknowledge your own shortcomings before you start to set those goals. And another good thing that Portland did was working with an organization to help them shape that framework. But as far as cities or organizations who have fallen short, NABSA can be used as an example. Back in 2018, as I mentioned, looking at our conference and who are attendees, who are the speakers, who's involved in this conference, and is it a diverse set of people? And we realized that it wasn't at the level where we wanted it to be. And over the last 3 years, we've been working to remedy that. And in 2021, we're shifting to a more active, what's the word I'm looking for? Approach. So we started hosting workshops last year, and we're looking to have more this year, where we're shifting from just talking about how can we be better to actually taking action for ourselves, but also for the industry.
Thank you. Quincy?
Yeah, I can kind of share. I think Oregon Metro has been doing a really great job in their racial equity strategic plan. It's pretty innovative, especially the structure in which Metro has and the ability and governance that they can do in the Metro region. So really holding not only, Metro adjacent organizations, but also their government partners and local agencies accountable to advance racial equity and actually create equitable systems, not in just transportation, but all the other aspects that are needed to make sure that we create just cities. And I think, but at the same time, as someone who, originally is from Portland and grew up here, I'm the first person to hold Portland accountable for its missteps as well. And I think that's really representative of that every community can learn from itself. And that I think planning has traditionally been inequitable. And so we're all trying to figure out how do we do this better. And so I think understanding that we can learn from people and that we're not necessarily, we never really have everyone at the table in these public engagement strategies. So ensuring that we are, consistently trying to bring more people to the table and consistently stepping back and looking internally and how can we be better ourselves so that we can also make sure that the community is better as well.
Thank you. Brodie?
Oftentimes equity is expensive. And so the first generations of shared transportation programs really weren't equitable. And you could even, just to go further with the Portland example, look at the first generation of the Biketown program, which served really just the downtown and inner east side. And I think this is actually reflective of most large city bikeshare programs in their first iteration, serving the densest and most affluent neighborhoods for that precise reason, because it's expensive, and it's more expensive when perhaps you're not getting the ridership and adoption rates you're hoping to achieve. So, I think we're getting there together, and that's what this is about.
And I just checked the time, and time flies by when you're having fun, and we're already at 10:59 Pacific time. So I was going to say we don't have time for any more questions, but here are the contact information for our speakers today. We will definitely be sharing a recap email with you all with all of the resources, all of the conversation that happened today. We do have one more poll question for you all today. And Crystal, are you available to play the question? It's just a quick one about our webinar today. And it is right here. Did you find this webinar informative? We have 100% saying yes. Thank you so much for that. We have one more webinar coming up in our webinar series. We want to say, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists, Destinie, Quincy, Joe, and Brodie, for sharing all your information and sharing your wealth of information with us and our attendees today. We have another webinar, as I mentioned, Clean and Equitable Mass Transit. Also, May, it is National Biking Month, so this kind of worked out. So you can take your bike out for lunch after this webinar if you feel motivated. But on May 25th, we have our final webinar in the spring winter season. It's going to cover clean and equitable mass transit, where we'll hear from bus manufacturers and panelists on why they're moving to all electric buses and the advantages of this form of transportation. We hope to see you next week. Thank you all again for joining us, and make sure you've signed up and you're registered for the Roadmap Conference happening June 14th through the 16th, 2021. Thank you all and have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks so much, all.